to go to sites of residential buildings that have been hit, with the criticism of foreign press being that the Israelis are trying to only show that civilians are the ones being targeted inside of Israel.
Hamda, many thanks for that. Hamda Saleh in Amman. Now, Donald Trump's position on Iran has changed several times in just a few weeks, shifting from peace talks and diplomacy to military strikes. It all began on March the 7th when Trump sent a letter to Iran's supreme leader offering to lift sanctions in exchange for a nuclear deal and gave Iran 60 days to negotiate. By the end of March, he ramped up the pressure, saying he would bomb like never before if talks failed, even as secret negotiations began through Oman. Between April and May, 5 rounds of talks were held. Trump said the two sides were very close to a deal, but no breakthrough came. Then on June the 12th, the UN nuclear watchdog declared Iran non-compliant. Trump responded by accusing Iran of stalling. On day 61, Israel launched a massive airstrike on Iranian nuclear sites. Trump called it an excellent move, despite calling for diplomacy just days earlier. The 6th round of talks was cancelled. Trump backed Israel and warned Iran to make a deal or face harsher strikes. On June the 19th, he gave diplomacy 2 more weeks, saying there was still a real chance for peace, but just 2 days later, Trump approved direct US strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. He called it a one-time strike, but warned of more to come. Simon Maybel is a professor of Middle East and International Politics at Lancaster University. He joins us from Lancaster in the UK. Good to see you again, Simon. Let me quote Donald Trump here. Had a spectacular military success yesterday, taking bomb right out of Iran's hands. Neither, of course, the IAEA nor the US Director of National Intelligence concluded in March that Iran has a bomb. However, Tulsi Gabbard then made that screeching U-turn on that intelligence, claiming Iran, only a few days ago, was weeks away from a bomb. It's very difficult to know what the truth is, or indeed what the reality of the intelligence assessment is at the moment. What should we make of those flip-flopping decisions?
Yeah, well, the other thing that we need to take into account, of course, is that we just don't know how successful these strikes have been. There are rumours coming out of Iran that key parts of the nuclear program, the civilian nuclear program, according to them, of course, were removed from these targeted sites a while ago. So whilst there may have been this performative and indeed very symbolic series of attacks, we don't know if they're successful or not. So it might be a little premature to proclaim this wonderful victory that Donald Trump has declared. But in terms of the flip-flopping, I mean, I don't think it's particularly surprising from this president. I think we've seen with his approach to diplomacy, seemingly calling Iran to the table, seemingly suggesting that there was scope for a deal, whilst all the while planning for this type of strike. So again, the diplomacy is a flip-flop. The intelligence seems to be a flip-flop, but it also seems to point to serious divisions between the political wing of the US administration and the more intelligence-minded wing of it, with the various agencies, I believe it's 18 security agencies, concluding or contributing to this report that said that Iran was not indeed seeking a nuclear weapon, or there was no evidence of Iran seeking a nuclear weapon. So there's a lot of different moving parts here, and I think what comes out of all of this is that there is a very clear political narrative at play, and that Donald Trump is making a pitch for this to be framed in the way that he wants it to be framed.
Yeah, talking about political narratives, something extraordinarily muddled at the moment is whether or not the Trump administration is seeking regime change. Apparently, according to Pete Hegseth and J.D. Vance, this isn't about regime change. But then, of course, not that long ago on Truth Social, Donald Trump says regime change. But if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be regime change? What do we make of that?
Again, that's politics coming to the fore. It's a play on his MAGA slogan, "Make America Great Again," "Make Iran Great Again." Well, he's got his own view of what a great Iran should look like, and it's very different from the Iran of the Islamic Republic, of course. So there's the political posturing again that links Trump's MAGA policy, and there's a lot to get into with that, of course, with Iran. But there's also this broader weird dynamic that you talked about with J.D. Vance, suggesting that the U.S. is not at war with Iran, but at war with its nuclear program. And this, again, it evokes memories of 22 years ago of the Iraq War, that was a war not against Iraq, but a war against terror. So there's a really strange way of framing this that is clearly underpinned by ideological currents, but it's also put very, very neatly through the lens of political framing. This is about making Iran great again and allowing Iran to become great again, but not about regime change.
All right, good to hear your thoughts. Simon Maybel now. Now, the UN Security Council is meeting on the Iran situation. China, Russia and Pakistan want to vote on a draft resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire. Addressing the Security Council, the International Atomic Energy Agency Director General, Raphael Grossi, warned that a failure to find a peaceful solution could endanger the entire world.
We have a window of opportunity to return to dialogue and diplomacy. If that window closes, violence and destruction could reach unthinkable levels, and the global non-proliferation regime, as we know it, could crumble and fall.
What happened?
Iran, Israel,
Huh?
Israel, Iran, the Middle East need peace. And
Where?
there is a path for diplomacy.
Also speaking, the UN Secretary General Antonio Gutteres, who warned of the risk of a widening conflict.
2 days ago, in this very
Ay, nako.
chamber, I made a direct appeal. Give peace a chance. That call was not heeded. Instead, the bombing of Iranian nuclear facilities by the United States marks a perilous turn in a region that is already reeling. From the outset of the crisis, I have repeatedly condemned any military escalation in the Middle East.
Middle
The
East?
people of the region cannot endure another cycle of destruction.
I was going to UN headquarters in New York and speak to Gabriel Elizondo. So, Gabe, this emergency meeting comes, of course, at the
Listen
behest of
again,
Iran
guys,
at a time
about
of
the news today.
critical importance given concerns around the impact of US strikes on nuclear sites. Do we have a clearer idea of the damage from the IAEA, and what about the diplomatic resolve here?
Yeah, that's right. It's a very good question. That's why we're watching so closely to what Raphael Grossi had to tell the council when he briefed them. This meeting is now over. It just lasted a little over 2 hours. And I want to talk about what Grossi had to say, because the short answer to your question is no, we don't know more about any damage. Grossi said, and these are his words, at this time, no one, including the IAEA, is in a position to assess the underground damage at Fordo. They say they simply cannot tell at this point. Although he did say, for example, at the Esfahan site, he said that additional buildings were hit in the U.S. strikes with affected buildings, including some related to uranium conversion process. And he said at the Natanz site, other fuel enrichment plant was hit again for a second or third time, confirming it used underground penetrating munitions by the United States. So the short answer here is that the IAEA is still trying to assess the situation, but Grossi told the council that Iran has informed them that there has been no increase in any.
So when you purchase a property in Dubai, so Dubai, Ras Al Khaimah, Abu Dhabi all have different rules, but in Dubai, that's worth 2 million dirham.
Resolution.
Yeah, that's a resolution that is being circulated amongst council members, and that will be taking place for the next 24 to 48 hours or so, where council members will be able to give suggestions or change language if they so desire. There's a negotiation process going on here. This draft, which has been seen by Al Jazeera, is a short draft, but it has two main points. Number one, it condemns the attacks against Iran's nuclear facilities, but it doesn't specifically name Israel or the United States. The draft also calls for an immediate ceasefire. These are key points here. If this draft goes to a vote in its current form, it could be the middle of this coming week. But again, it's hard to see how the United States would agree to a draft, a resolution by the Security Council that condemns its very own actions. So the U.S. potentially could use its veto power, as it has on 5 separate occasions, to veto Security Council resolutions calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. So listen, there's going to be some serious negotiations taking place by council members over the next 24 to 36 hours, but we'll see what comes out of it and if this ultimately is put up for a vote in the coming days.
All right, Gabe, as always, many thanks. Gabriel Elizondo there at the UN headquarters in New York. Okay, let's introduce Giorgio Caffiero, who's the CEO of Gulf State Analytics. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Good to see you, Giorgio. So there's an awful lot of speculation about how Iran will calibrate its response. We know that it will respond to some extent. Whether it will hold fire and keep the door open for negotiations is one possibility. There is an assumption also that there will be an attempt to send a message militarily to the United States. And we know there's no shortage of potential targets across the Gulf. But does it make sense for Iran to strike U.S. targets in Gulf nations that it has good diplomatic ties with?
Yeah, you know, the Iranians and some of the Gulf states, such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE, have spent the past couple of years improving relations, and both sides have had vested interests in improving these relationships. And I think Iran is going to be careful to avoid actions right now that could bring these relationships back to a period of hostility. And also, it should be noted that in terms of the strikes which the U.S. just carried out against Iran, the GCC states were not really a part of that. These strikes did not take place from U.S. bases in GCC states. I think that there's also a more important point to keep in mind here, too, is that Iran is in a very difficult position. The country does not want to fight an all-out war with the United States right now. I also think the country wants to get to a point where it can have sanctions lifted. At the same time, Iran is very worried that if it does not respond, it's going to send the wrong message out to the U.S. and other countries in the world that Iran can basically just be bullied into doing what the West wants. So Iran has to figure out the way it's going to respond, and we also need to keep in mind that there is a tremendous amount of bottom-up pressure from Iranian society to retaliate and to do something, and of course those domestic dynamics are always important in these kinds of situations.
Okay, so there's pressure to retaliate, but whatever retaliation needs to be carefully calibrated so that Iran isn't fighting on two fronts against Israel and the United States, and isn't also upsetting key allies in the region. I mean, much of the world's oil and other key commodities, of course, such as natural gas, pass through busy sea lanes in the Middle East, including the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, the health of Gulf economies are at stake here. Do we imagine that there are back channels open between Iran and these nations to keep global shipping moving, or could we see that part of the world being a pinch point in this crisis?
Everyone is asking whether or not the Iranians are going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, or at least interrupt the movement of gas and oil through this strait. That is one source of leverage the Iranians do have, but we need to keep in mind, though, that this would harm the economic interests of many countries that are friendly to Iran and are very important partners, such as China. And therefore, I think Iran will be careful about whatever moves it takes in the Strait of Hormuz. And also, we need to keep in mind that if the Iranians were to shut down this artery, the U.S. military would certainly get involved, and that is not necessarily a scenario that the Iranians want to find themselves in.
All right, Giorgio Caffiero, good to hear your thoughts. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Still ahead on Al Jazeera. Israel kills more than 30 Palestinians in Gaza in its blockade of fuel, puts ambulances out of service in Gaza City. And at least 20 people are killed in a rare suicide bomb attack on a church in Syria. What is the treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, and why does it matter that Iran threatened to pull out of it?
I have the right to boycott anyone I want to, and the state has no business getting involved in that.
God's chosen to bless us because we protect Israel. I'm going to continue to do on a state level all that I can to support that.
A three-part series explores the implications of U.S. anti-boycott laws for freedom of speech and First Amendment rights.
I regret not knowing more about the issue when I voted.
I'm looking forward for my day in court.
Part 2, In Court, on Al Jazeera.
They didn't want the average person to know what the truth was about climate change. Scientists dismissed as prophets of doom. We knew where the temperature was going to go. By leaders seeking the profits of industry.
They were publishing reports saying this is not an urgent problem.
Could we have changed the course of the climate emergency?
Our air is polluted. Our skies are red.
Dying Earth. Lost futures. On Al Jazeera.
Watching Al Jazeera, here's a reminder of our top stories this hour. Iran says time for diplomacy has passed, and its military will decide the timing, nature, and scale of response to US strikes on 3 nuclear sites. Iran's fired a barrage of missiles at Israel following that US attack. US President Donald Trump's top military officials say Iran's nuclear sites are severely damaged, but insists the US is not at war with Iran or its people. Israel continues its attacks across Iran. The Israeli military says it's conducting strikes on several cities, including the Share. For the first time, the central province of Gaza.
Tell to Miss 8 of tomorrow.
Well, there's also been reaction from Europe. Diplomatic editor James Bays has this from The Hague.
I think there's been some head scratching in Western capitals, those allies of the United States, what to say about what has just happened. We have a statement from the so-called E3. This is 3 European countries, the UK, Germany and France, that have been involved in nuclear diplomacy in Iran for a very long time. They were involved in the nuclear deal in 2015, the deal that Donald Trump ripped up. And of course, these 3 foreign ministers were sitting down with the Iranian foreign minister just hours before the US launched its attack. It's clear Donald Trump was talking diplomacy, but in fact it was a ruse, and so the US was not practicing diplomacy, in this case practicing deceit. Now these E3 foreign ministers, their statement is interesting, I think, because you have to read between the lines about what's not in this statement. They say that they discussed the latest developments in the Middle East in recent hours, and they say earlier today the US conducted military strikes against nuclear facilities in Iran. What they don't say is whether they think that strike was a good thing or a bad thing. And we have different things coming out from the E3. The statement from the French foreign minister notes what's happened with concern, whereas the German foreign minister seems to see some justification. He says that preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons is legitimate. So I think difficult times for these Western leaders, how exactly to respond. They may like what the United States has done, but I think they're worried about the legality behind it and whether this is actually legitimate in international law. James Bays, Al Jazeera, in The Hague.
Well, on the diplomatic front, Iran's foreign ministers arrived in Moscow. We'll have talks with President Vladimir Putin on Monday. Russia's UN envoy condemned the US bombings in Iran as irresponsible and dangerous at Sunday's emergency meeting at the Security Council.
Washington yet again demonstrated its complete contempt for the position of the international community. Washington reasserted that to further the interests of its Israeli ally, it's prepared not only to turn a blind eye to the killing of tens of thousands of Palestinian women, children, and older persons, but also to gamble with the safety and well-being of humanity as a whole. Through their actions, the U.S. has opened a Pandora's box. No one knows what new catastrophes and suffering will bring.
And I hope there is peace
Bashar
between
is
these
Al
two
Jazeera senior
countries, you know.
political analyst. He joins us from Paris. Good to see you, Marwan. It's a kind of strange topsy-turvy world when we have Russia pleading with the world
Thank you, Blake
not
Freeman,
to see the sovereignty of another country eroded. I mean, we can clearly see the diplomatic efforts are being made in the UN. Meanwhile, Ambassador Rakci is heading to Moscow.
Anyway,
what kind of stake does Russia have in this crisis and in helping to solve it?
I mean, you're right. It is paradoxical that Putin wants to play a role in resolving the conflict when he is fully engaged in another. But putting that aside, I think he does have a role to play if he wants to, or he's allowed to, if the Iranians insist on it. Whereby
I'm here. I'm from the Philippines, and I'm working here in the UAE. So I'm just listening to this news.
Iran and Russia on the other side. And that could actually be a formula.
Thank you, Blake Freeman, for joining.
The United States is supposed to lean on Israel.
I just finished my work and I reached my room.
Iran, and hence there would be some sort of a bridging of some sort, a communication going.
I'm so sad.
So far, I think
always
Trump is not interested
news.
really in asymmetry. He's much more interested in
I want
dominating and dictating
for both
to the Iranians
sides.
what to do and allowing the Israelis to finish winning, as he puts it.
Oh my God.
As you say, the suggestion is that there are attempts to create a kind of architecture by way of diffusing the tension. Russia, on the one hand, playing a role in diffusing things on behalf of Iran, the US with Israel. But then, of course, you have this bombshell thrown into the middle of it all. We'd heard from Pete Hegseth and J.D. Vance both saying that this wasn't about regime change. Now, Donald Trump's weighed into things saying, why wouldn't there be a regime change? Make Iran great again.
I'm living here in the UAE, guys, but I'm from the Philippines.
In the midst
Thank
of
you for
trying to
joining me
calibrate
live.
a response to US strikes on your country,
thanks everyone.
How would you read comments like that, pushing for possible regime change?
I think in some recent days, the Australian Prime Minister was asked about a Trump tweet or something of that nature, and he said, "Didn't I tell you to stop asking me about what Trump said the night before?" I don't have no response.
Thank you for watching.
So I think Trump does these things in order to get reactions, to get a response. Look, these things, the thing that he dreams up at night or he hears on Fox News the evening before, he talks to one of his fellow billionaires that morning, and he tweets or does
I'm good. I just reached my room now.
These are not things that are worked out through
so sad
the
listening to this
process
news every day
in the National Security Council, within the interdepartmental or network of state and Pentagon and so on. None of that. He just kind of makes things up, hoping for more attention, hoping people forget about his 2 weeks deadlines. We won in Iran. This has been what I think the eighth attack that America carries against a Muslim country for the past 15 years. That's an average of one attack, one war every 2 years against a